There's something about the name Tyrannosaurus Rex that feels larger than life. Even if you've never studied dinosaurs, you've heard it. The T-Rex, the king of the tyrant lizards. It's the creature that roars across movie screens, stomps through our imaginations, and rules children's books, toys, and dreams. For over a century, it's been the ultimate symbol of prehistoric power, the monster that ruled the ancient Earth. But the real T-Rex, the one that lived and breathed over 66 million years ago, wasn't exactly what most people imagine. The truth is quieter, stranger, and maybe even more fascinating. Because behind the legend, the teeth, the roar, the claws, is a story of survival, evolution, and mystery that stretches across time. If you could travel back to the late Cretaceous, to what's now Western North America, you wouldn't find a dry desert or a Hollywood wasteland. You'd step into a green, humid world, full of tall trees, ferns, and rivers that wound through thick forests. The air would hum with the sounds of insects and the distant calls of animals. And somewhere among that lush, ancient landscape, the Tyrant King would move, not constantly roaring, but quiet, watchful, powerful. When people think of T-Rex, they picture noise and chaos. But in truth, most of its world was silence, a forest floor covered in fallen leaves, a swamp buzzing with dragonflies the size of your hand, the soft splash of a massive foot sinking into the mud, and then stillness. Because when T-Rex appeared, everything else held its breath. The first bones of this legendary animal were found not by a movie director or a scientist with fancy equipment, but by explorers and fossil hunters walking through the rocky hills of Montana. They had no idea that buried beneath their feet was something that would capture the imagination of the entire planet. When the fossils were uncovered, those thick, curved teeth like knives, the enormous leg bones, the skull the size of a man, people couldn't help but give it a name that matched its size: Tyrannosaurus Rex. The name itself means Tyrant Lizard King. It's funny to think that even before the bones were fully understood, the legend had already begun. News of this creature spread fast. It was unlike anything anyone had seen before, a predator big enough to crush a car beneath its feet, yet agile enough to hunt. In the early 1900s, when the world was still full of mystery, the idea of a giant, lost animal roaming the past stirred something deep in people's hearts. It was as if the ground itself was whispering stories from another world. Museums competed to find more fossils. Artists tried to imagine what it looked like. Some painted T-Rex as a lumbering beast, slow and clumsy. Others drew it sleek and deadly, with gleaming eyes and a tail like a whip. Over time, it became more than a fossil. It became a mirror for human imagination. Whatever we feared or admired or dreamed about in nature, we projected onto T-Rex. It was our monster, our mystery, our symbol of ancient power. But the real creature was not a mindless destroyer. It was an animal, a living, breathing being that woke each morning to a world that demanded strength, intelligence, and adaptation. It hunted when it could, scavenged when it must, and fought for survival just like every other species before and after it. Scientists now know that T-Rex grew slowly at first, then rapidly in its teenage years, reaching full size in its 20s. Imagine watching it grow, from a feathery, lanky youth to a muscular adult nearly 40 feet long. Every scar on its skin, every broken tooth it shed, told the story of life in a dangerous world. And while the movies show it roaring at everything in sight, most researchers believe T-Rex might not have roared at all. It may have made deep, low sounds, more like the rumble of thunder than a scream. If you were close enough to hear it, you wouldn't just hear it. You'd feel it, vibrating through your bones. Even after all these years of study, T-Rex remains both known and unknown. Every fossil tells a new part of the story: how it moved, how it hunted, even how it cared for its young. And yet, for all our science, there's still something mysterious about it. Something that makes us stop and imagine what it would be like to stand in its shadow. to feel the weight of a world that existed long before ours. That's what makes the T-Rex so fascinating. It's not just a dinosaur. It's an echo, a reminder of a time when nature ruled absolutely, when the line between beauty and terror was blurred, and when life itself was as wild and untamed as the world around it. The Tyrant King may be gone, its bones turned to stone, its forests long vanished, but its story still breathes. And as we begin to unmask the legend, to separate the myth from the truth, we discover that the real T-Rex might be even more remarkable than the one we've imagined, because behind every shadow, there's something real, and behind the roar of the king, there's the heartbeat of an animal that once ruled the earth with quiet, majestic power. Long before anyone knew the name Tyrannosaurus Rex, there were just bones, scattered fragments buried deep in ancient stone, quiet, cold, waiting. For millions of years they lay hidden under dust, under grass, under the steady patience of the earth. Until one day, a pair of human hands brushed them free and history began to shift. It was the late 1800s, an age of discovery. Across North America, from Montana to Wyoming, explorers, ranchers, and scientists were finding strange, enormous bones sticking out of cliffs and badlands. People called them dragon bones, or giant lizards, not yet realizing what kind of world they were uncovering. In 1902, in the dry Golden Hills of Montana, a fossil hunter named Barnum Brown found something that didn't look like anything anyone had seen before. He worked for the American Museum of Natural History in New York, a man with sharp eyes and a steady hand, who spent his days searching for traces of the ancient past. The ground around him was quiet except for the wind, carrying dust and the faint scent of sage. He was used to finding bones, but these were different. The first piece was a tooth, curved, thick, sharp as a blade even after 66 million years. Then came a fragment of jaw, heavy as stone and lined with those massive teeth. And then more bones, ribs, claws, pieces of skull, each one enormous, far larger than anything known at the time. As Brown carefully brushed away the dirt, the picture began to emerge. He was uncovering the remains of a predator unlike any other. It stood as tall as a house, stretched longer than a bus, and had a skull that could crush bone with ease. At that moment, the world's most famous dinosaur was being born again, bone by bone. When the fossils were brought back to New York, the scientists there were astonished. The creature was given its name soon after, Tyrannosaurus Rex, king of the tyrant lizards. It sounded like something from a legend, and in a way, it was. The public couldn't get enough of it. Newspapers printed drawings calling it the greatest carnivorous animal that ever walked the earth. In those early days, though, no one really knew what it looked like. There were no computer models or digital reconstructions, just bones, plaster, and imagination. Artists guessed how it stood, how it moved, even how it might have hunted. Some imagined it upright, tail dragging behind like a lizard. Others saw it crouched low, like a bird ready to strike. Each guess brought the creature a little closer to life, even if the details weren't yet right. It's as strange to think that one of the most famous animals in the world began as a pile of bones in the dirt, silent, unremarkable, until someone looked closely enough to see its story. But that's the magic of fossils. They're more than rock, they're memory, time frozen in shape and texture. Each bone carries not just weight, but evidence of life, scratches, breaks, tiny holes where blood once flowed. Barnum Brown's discovery changed paleontology forever. Before T-Rex, dinosaurs were fascinating. After T-Rex, they were alive in the public imagination. Museums built giant halls just to hold them. People lined up to see the tyrant lizard in person, staring up at its skull in awe. Even though only parts of it were found at first, it was enough to spark a worldwide obsession. And yet, Brown himself couldn't have known how famous his find would become. He kept digging, season after season, returning to those same hills where the wind sang softly through the canyons. Each time, he uncovered a little more, another rib, a vertebra, a tooth, each one helping to complete the puzzle. In a way, those discoveries felt like unearthing the bones of myth. The T-Rex became both real and unreal. A creature that once ruled the earth, now reborn as a symbol of nature's raw power. But if you imagine Barnum Brown kneeling there in the sun, his hat low, his tools gentle, you realize something. This wasn't about monsters. It was about patience, about wonder. The quiet joy of finding something ancient and knowing it connects us, across time, across extinction, to life itself. Even today, when scientists find new fossils, they still feel what Brown must have felt that day, that mix of awe and humility. You're holding something older than mountains, something that once lived and breathed, and in that moment, the past doesn't feel so far away. The bones of T-Rex have since been found in many places, in South Dakota, in Wyoming, even in Canada. Each new skeleton adds a piece to the puzzle, a clue about how this mighty creature lived and died. But that first discovery, over a century ago, still stands as one of the most important moments in paleontology, the moment the king rose again. And as scientists began to piece together the skeleton, the huge legs, the tiny arms, the skull full of teeth, they started to wonder, what kind of creature had this been? How did it move? How did it hunt? Was it the unstoppable predator we imagine, or something else entirely? Those questions would take decades to answer, and even now, we're still not done asking them, because every fossil has a secret, and the T-Rex, perhaps more than any other, still keeps a few. When the first bones of Tyrannosaurus Rex were shipped from the dusty hills of Montana to the great halls of the American Museum of Natural History in New York, no one really knew what they were looking at. They were massive, yes, heavy as stone, dark as rust, shaped in ways that defied imagination, but they were still just bones, pieces of something ancient, something powerful, something lost. Scientists gathered around the crates with quiet excitement. Each piece was carefully laid out on tables under soft yellow lamps. The air was thick with dust and anticipation. Here was the skull, or at least part of it, with teeth longer than a man's hand. Here were the leg bones, thick as pillars, suggesting an animal that could carry enormous weight. And then there were the arms, small, almost comically small. 2 bones where they expected much more. It was as if nature herself had played a joke, giving the greatest predator on Earth the smallest arms imaginable. Paleontologists stared, puzzled, amused, a little awed. How could something so powerful also look so awkward? But science begins with imagination, and from those bones, imagination took flight. Artists and fossil experts worked together to create the first models of T-Rex. They built the skeletons from the inside out, wireframes for structure, plaster for the bones that were missing, and endless, careful measurement to make sure everything fit. It was slow work, painstaking. Each bone had to find its proper place like a puzzle made without a picture on the box. And still, there were gaps. Missing ribs, shattered vertebrae, entire sections of the tail that had to be guessed. So they did what humans have always done when they face the unknown. They filled it with stories. In 1905, the world saw the first official reconstruction of Tyrannosaurus Rex. It was massive, muscular, and terrifying. But it didn't look exactly like the T-Rex we know today. In that early version, the dinosaur stood upright, its tail dragging along the ground like a giant lizard's. Its head was tilted proudly forward like a soldier standing at attention. It looked strong, yes, but stiff, almost unnatural, frozen in posture. That first image, however, would define T-Rex for decades. People visited the museum in awe, staring up at the towering skeleton, imagining it thundering through jungles and swamps, roaring into the sky. Children clung to their parents. Adults stood silently, trying to imagine what life must have been like when such creatures ruled the world. The truth was, no one really knew how it moved, or even how it stood. But the legend didn't wait for facts. It spread through newspapers, books, and later the silver screen. And the T-Rex, built on bones, plaster, and imagination, became the world's most famous predator. As the years went on, new discoveries began to challenge that early image. Fossil evidence from related species suggested that dinosaurs didn't T-walk upright like people. They leaned forward, balanced by long tails held high in the air. The old kangaroo pose of T-Rex slowly gave way to something sleeker, more bird-like, more dynamic. It's strange to think how much art and science shape one another. A single drawing can define how millions of people picture a creature for generations. And, for a long time, the T-Rex we all knew, the one from paintings, books, and old museum halls, wasn't quite accurate. It was still magnificent, still terrifying, but also a little wrong. That's what makes its story so fascinating. The T-Rex wasn't just discovered once. It's been rediscovered again and again. Every time a new fossil was found, every time a new generation of scientists looked closer, questioned deeper, imagined better. The king keeps changing. Today, we know much more about its body. Its legs were built like steel beams, yet flexible enough to move quickly. Its tail wasn't dead weight. It was a counterbalance, helping it run with surprising grace. Its skull wasn't just a weapon. It was an architectural masterpiece, strong enough to crush bone but light enough to move swiftly. And those tiny arms? They weren't useless at all. They were powerful, with thick muscles and claws that could grip prey, hold mates, or lift itself off the ground. Small, yes, but strong. Every new fossil adds another brushstroke to the portrait. The skin, once thought to be rough and scaly, may have had patches of texture like crocodile hide, or even faint traces of feathers, especially in young T-Rexes. Its colors, long lost to time, are now guessed at. Deep, earthy tones, maybe dark greens or browns, or something unexpected like muted reds or golds to help it blend into the forest shadows. When scientists rebuild T-Rex today, they do it with reverence. Each bone, each fragment, each new theory reminds us that nature is both artist and engineer, and that we are still only beginning to understand her designs. Standing before a full T-Rex skeleton now, in Chicago, New York, or London, is an experience unlike any other. You look up, your eyes tracing the curve of its jaw, the sharpness of its teeth, the length of its spine, and even though it's just fossilized stone, you can almost feel it breathe. There's an energy there, something ancient, something alive. The bones may be still, but the imagination around them never is, and that's the beauty of it. The real T-Rex lives not in the rock, but in the space between fact and wonder, the place where science meets story. Barnum Brown may have uncovered the bones, but every generation since has helped build the king anew, piece by piece, thought by thought. And still, there is more to uncover, because every time we think we've built the perfect version of the Tyrant King, time and science gently remind us that the truth is always evolving. When you close your eyes and picture a T-Rex, what do you see? Maybe it's a mountain of muscle covered in rough scales, jaws wide, eyes burning like fire. Maybe you hear the roar, that famous echoing sound that shakes the jungle in every movie. But what if I told you that the real T-Rex might have looked and even sounded very different from what we imagine? Science has this beautiful way of reminding us that truth often hides in the smallest details. A single bone, a fragment of skin, a faint impression left in stone. For over a century, people imagined dinosaurs as giant reptiles, their skin like crocodiles, their movements heavy and cold. But slowly, quietly, evidence began to whisper another story. It started with smaller dinosaurs, fossils found in China, beautifully preserved, with soft, delicate traces of feathers pressed into the rock. Not scales, feathers. They weren't like the feathers of modern birds, not yet colorful or perfect, but they were there, primitive and soft like a layer of down. At first, scientists thought it was just for the small ones, the chicken-sized raptors, the early hunters. But then came more discoveries. Bigger dinosaurs, closer in family to T-Rex, also showed signs of feathery coatings. Not full plumage, but tufts here and there, a sign that even the giants might have worn something softer than scales. And so the question began to grow. Could the king of the dinosaurs, the fearsome T-Rex itself, have had feathers? Not everyone liked the idea. For generations, the image of T-Rex had been fixed in our minds as a scaly, thunderous reptile. The thought of it with feathers, even a few, felt strange, almost comical. But science doesn't care about what feels right. It follows the evidence no matter how strange it becomes. The truth is, we don't yet know for certain how feathered T-Rex really was. Some fossils suggest that baby T-Rexes might have had a light coat of fuzz to keep them warm, much like chicks do today. As they grew larger, their bodies would have generated enough heat to survive without it, shedding most of the feathers as adults. Others believe that adults might have kept a few patches around the head, the tail, or the spine, giving them a striking, almost regal appearance. It's not such a strange idea when you think about it. After all, birds are the descendants of dinosaurs. If you look at an eagle or a cassowary, you're seeing a living echo of the past. A creature with a beak instead of teeth, wings instead of claws, but still carrying that ancient fire in its blood. And when you watch a bird tilt its head and study you with one sharp eye, you can almost imagine what it was like to be watched by T-Rex. Beyond the question of feathers, scientists have also learned much more about the texture of its skin. Some fossils preserve impressions that show large, pebbly scales, especially along the legs and tail. Others show smoother, flexible areas, skin that could stretch, twist, and bend as it moved. It wasn't armored like a crocodile, nor delicate like a bird. It was something in between, a balance of strength and motion. Then there's the color, a mystery that no fossil can fully answer. For a long time, people imagined dinosaurs as dull green or brown, blending into jungles. But in truth, color doesn't fossilize easily, so we can only guess. Maybe the T-Rex had muted patterns for camouflage, or perhaps during mating season, patches of bright color appeared on its face or crest, much like modern birds. In the mind's eye, you can see it. Not a monster, but a living creature of subtle beauty. And what about its roar? That deep, cinematic scream we all know. It's unforgettable, thrilling, terrifying. But it's also completely made up. In reality, T-Rex's skull structure suggests it may not have been able to roar the way mammals do. Instead, it probably made low, resonant sounds, deep vibrations that could travel through the ground and air. If you were close enough to hear it, you wouldn't just hear the T-Rex, you'd feel it, in your chest, in your bones. A voice like distant thunder rolling across a primeval plain. Every new discovery strips away a little bit of the myth, and yet somehow makes the creature more fascinating. Because the more we learn about T-Rex, the more we realize how real it was. Not a perfect movie monster, not a legend carved in stone, but an animal. One that felt heat and cold, that hunted and slept, that lived and died like any other. If you close your eyes now and imagine that ancient world, the forests, the rivers, the endless plains of the late Cretaceous, you might picture it there. A massive figure moving through the mist, its skin glistening faintly with dew, its eyes sharp, intelligent, scanning the horizon. And on its neck, maybe, just maybe, the faint shimmer of downy feathers catching the morning light. That's what makes it so haunting. The T-Rex is both familiar and alien. A creature of bone and breath that walk the same earth we stand on, under the same sun, the same stars, and while it's been gone for millions of years, the echoes of its footsteps still rumble faintly in our collective memory. Because when we imagine it, when we paint it in our minds, we're not just rebuilding a dinosaur. We're rebuilding time itself. Every great creature in history carries a question with it, a single mystery that defines its legend. For Tyrannosaurus Rex, that question has always been simple, but not easy. Was it truly the king of the hunters, or merely a scavenger who ruled over the dead? It's a question that has lingered like a shadow since the first fossils were found, because even though its name means Tyrant Lizard King, science demands more than titles. It wants evidence. When the first complete T-Rex skeletons were reconstructed, everyone assumed it was a predator. How could it not be? It had massive jaws, huge teeth, forward-facing eyes for depth perception, all the trademarks of a killer. Its legs were long and strong, suggesting speed and power. Its skull was built like an engine of destruction. But as paleontologists studied the bones more closely, small doubts began to form. For one thing, those enormous teeth, while terrifying, were not knife-sharp like those of smaller carnivores. They were thick, blunt, almost banana-shaped. Not made for slicing cleanly, but for crushing. That suggested something different. Maybe not a fast, graceful hunter, but a bone-crushing opportunist. Then came the arms. Those famously tiny arms, each one barely longer than a child's. Could a true hunter, the apex predator of its world, have survived with such tiny tools? How could it grab prey, hold it, or fight? Some scientists argued that those arms were proof. T-Rex didn't need to fight its prey alive. It feasted on what was already dead. But others saw things differently. They pointed out that the arms, while short, were incredibly strong. The bones were thick, and the muscles that once attached there must have been powerful enough to lift several hundred pounds. Maybe those arms were used for gripping a mate, holding on to struggling prey, or helping it rise from the ground. Tiny, yes, but far from useless. The debate grew louder as more fossils were found. Skulls with healed bite marks, bones with teeth embedded deep in them, teeth that belonged to T-Rex itself. One fossilized hadrosaur even showed signs of having survived a T-Rex attack, its tailbones bitten clean through, yet healed before death. That was the proof scientists needed. T-Rex did hunt. It didn't just scavenge, it chased, it bit, it fought. But perhaps the truth, as it often does, lies somewhere in the middle. T-Rex lived in a world full of danger. It shared its territory with massive herbivores, Triceratops, Edmontosaurus, Ankylosaurus. These weren't easy meals. Each was strong, fast, and heavily armed. Hunting them would have been risky, maybe even deadly. So T-Rex might have been both. A hunter when the chance was right, a scavenger when it was not. Its keen sense of smell supported that idea. Inside its skull, scientists found huge olfactory bulbs, parts of the brain used to detect scent. That means T-Rex could probably smell a carcass from miles away. In the quiet forests of the late Cretaceous, that sense would have been a powerful gift, leading it to meals whether they were fresh kills or long dead. And there was another clue, hidden in the legs. For years, people thought T-Rex was fast enough to chase anything that moved. But as scientists measured and modeled its bones, they realized its body might have been too heavy for real sprinting. Maybe it didn't run at all. Instead, it might have walked steadily, silently, covering ground with long, powerful strides. A slow but unstoppable force, more patient than quick, more deliberate than wild. In that sense, T-Rex might have hunted like a crocodile, waiting, stalking, striking only when sure of success. It didn't need to run. It needed only to be there, to arrive, to dominate, to feed. Imagine that scene for a moment. The late Cretaceous forest is still. The air is warm and thick. Somewhere, a herd of hadrosaurs grazes near a riverbank, their tails swaying slowly. And then, a sound. Faint at first, then growing. The heavy thud of footsteps, the snap of branches, the smell of blood. From the shadows, T-Rex steps forward. It doesn't rush. It doesn't need to. The air trembles with its breath. And when it finally moves, fast as lightning, jaws wide, it strikes not with panic, but with precision. Because this was no mindless killer. It was a creature built by time, by evolution, by perfect purpose. To call it a scavenger would be unfair. To call it a hunter might be too simple. It was both, the ultimate survivor. It didn't care how the world saw it. It just lived. It ruled. It endured. And maybe that's why, after 66 million years, we still talk about it. Not because of its teeth, or its size, or its roar, but because it reminds us of something deep and true about life itself. You don't have to be perfect to be powerful. You just have to adapt. The Tyrant King did that better than almost anyone. Until, of course, the world itself began to change, in ways even it couldn't survive. The world of T-Rex was not the world we know today. If you could step through time and find yourself standing on that ancient ground, you might not recognize the planet beneath your feet. The air would feel different. Thicker, warmer, heavier with moisture. The light would have a golden haze, filtering through a sky where volcanoes smoked in the distance and strange birds wheeled overhead. It was the late Cretaceous, about 66 million years ago, and the Earth was alive in a way that feels almost mythic now. Forests stretched across what is now North America, dense with tall conifers, ferns, and flowering plants just beginning to rise. The land was not yet divided as it is today. No rocky mountains, no familiar plains. Instead, a shallow sea split the continent in two, known as the Western Interior Seaway. To the east lay humid coastal swamps, and to the west, the realm of T-Rex, lay forests, rivers, and floodplains that rolled endlessly toward the horizon. It was a land of sounds, the deep croaks of amphibians, the rustle of giant insects, the calls of creatures so ancient their voices are lost to us, and among it all, the rhythmic tremor of footsteps. Because T-Rex was not alone. Its world was crowded with life, each species fighting for space, food, and survival. In the same forests roamed the great horned Triceratops, its 3 sharp horns glinting beneath the sun. It was the last and largest of its kind, an armored herbivore as long as a bus, its head crowned with a vast bony frill. T-Rex and Triceratops would have seen each other often. They were rivals in an endless dance, hunter and prey, neither truly winning, both surviving through constant challenge. One with teeth built for crushing bone, the other with horns built for piercing flesh. Their battles must have been thunderous, brief, and terrible, the kind of fight that shook the forest floor and ended in silence. Then there were the herds of Edmontosaurus, the duck-billed dinosaurs. They moved in groups, hundreds strong, grazing on the ferns and low trees that blanketed the floodplains. They were gentle, cautious creatures, always alert, because they knew that somewhere, in the shadows or behind a tree line, the king might be watching, waiting. Other creatures filled the skies and waters. Massive pterosaurs glided above the rivers, their wings casting fleeting shadows on the ground below. In the swamps, crocodile ancestors drifted silently, their eyes breaking the surface just enough to watch. And deeper still, turtles, fish, and small mammals lived in the margins, soft voices in a world ruled by giants. Even the insects were enormous, dragonflies with wings wider than your hand, beetles thick as a thumb, mosquitoes as big as birds. Life flourished in every corner, chaotic and abundant. It was not a gentle world, but it was balanced. Every creature played its part. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted, life and death circling endlessly like the tides. The air itself was different too. The carbon levels were higher, the oxygen richer. That's why life could grow so large. Why plants towered, animals swelled, and the earth seemed to overflow with energy. The climate was warm, almost tropical, even in regions that today are frozen and barren. Imagine Montana, lush and humid like a jungle, with rivers winding through thick vegetation and the distant rumble of thunder rolling over the trees. That was T-Rex's world, a living paradise built on danger. But even paradise has its cracks. Volcanoes erupted frequently, painting the sky red and black. Ash would fall like snow, blanketing the forests, smothering plants, choking rivers. The ground would tremble beneath the feet of creatures too ancient to understand what was happening, and yet life always returned. Seeds sprouted again, rivers cleared, and the great circle continued. T-Rex thrived in this rhythm. It was not the eternal ruler of a peaceful kingdom, but a survivor in a volatile, ever-changing land. It hunted where it could, scavenged where it must, and adapted as the earth shifted around it. Its size and strength made it king, but its intelligence kept it alive. Because T-Rex was not just muscle and bone. Its brain, though small compared to its body, was sharp. Its senses finely tuned. It could see far, smell deeply, hear low frequencies that most animals couldn't. It was, in every way, designed for its world. And in that world, every creature knew its place. The great Triceratops defended its young. The duckbills ran in herds for safety. Even the small mammals, distant ancestors of us, darted between roots and shadows, clever enough to survive where giants fell. At night, the world glowed softly under the light of a giant moon. The forests shimmered with fireflies. The air buzzed with unseen wings, and sometimes from far away a sound would break the calm, low, deep, and ancient, a call that was not quite a roar, but a vibration of power, the voice of the king. It's strange to think that this alien world, with its monsters, jungles, and thunder, once stood exactly where we live now. Under our cities, our roads, our fields, lie the remains of that lost age. The bones of giants sleep beneath us. And maybe, when the wind blows just right, the earth still remembers. Because the story of T-Rex is not just about the animal, it's about the world that built it. A world of beauty and brutality, balance and chaos. A world that reminds us how fragile, and yet how enduring, life can be. The end did not come with warning. There were no signs, no dark prophecy in the sky. Just another day in the world of giants. The rivers still shimmered in the sun. The forests whispered softly in the wind. And the Tyrant King still ruled his green domain, as he always had. But somewhere far away, across an ocean, the sky cracked open. A mountain from the heavens, a rock more than 6 miles wide, was falling toward Earth at unimaginable speed. It tore through the air faster than sound, brighter than fire, older than fear itself. And when it struck, the world changed forever. The impact came in an instant, a blinding flash, a roar that silenced every other sound. The ground rippled like water. Forests ignited. Oceans rose in walls of flame. The air itself caught fire as shock waves circled the planet. In that single moment, the age of dinosaurs began to die. For the creatures that survived the first blast, those far from the crater, the next days were worse. The sky darkened, filled with ash and dust that blotted out the sun. Day turned to endless twilight. The temperature dropped. Plants stopped growing. Rain turned acidic. The great herds that had once filled the valleys began to starve. And the hunters, the proud, terrible hunters, followed soon after. In the fading light, T-Rex walked through its dying world. It could still smell the air, still feel the wind, but something was different. The sounds of life, the insects, the frogs, the cries of prey, had faded. Each day was colder. The forests grew quieter. The rivers, once clear, ran dark with ash, and even the king could not fight the sky. It's easy to imagine that last night, not as a moment of drama, but of stillness. A single T-Rex, standing on a hill beneath a red, dim sky. It breathes slowly, its chest rising and falling. In the distance, lightning flashes across clouds of dust. It does not understand the end. It only feels the emptiness, the absence of the world it once knew. And then, silence. That's how the story of the Tyrant King ends, not with a roar, but with a whisper. Within a few thousand years, a blink in geological time, The forests that once held giants were empty. Only bones remained, buried beneath layers of rock, waiting for the world to remember. But endings, even the darkest ones, have meaning, because from that destruction came rebirth. The small mammals that hid underground, creatures no larger than your hand, survived. They climbed from the shadows, inheriting a world wiped clean. They evolved, adapted, grew, and millions of years later, one of them would dig into the earth and find the bones of the king. That's the strange beauty of history. Even extinction leaves behind its voice. Every fossil, every stone, every echo of a footstep is a reminder that nothing truly disappears. The T-Rex may have fallen, but its memory endures. Not as terror, but as wonder. A creature so powerful that even time could not erase its name. If you listen closely tonight, in the quiet between dreams, you might still hear it. A deep, distant rumble. Not the sound of destruction, but of memory. The earth remembering the heartbeat of a king. Because even though the tyrant fell, its shadow still stretches across the ages. And in that shadow, we are reminded of what came before, and what might come again. The king slept for 66 million years. Buried beneath layers of rock and time, its bones rested quietly in the dark, surrounded by stone, pressed by earth, and forgotten by the world it once ruled. Above it, continents drifted, mountains rose, and the shape of the planet changed completely. The sea that once cut North America in half dried up. Forests turned to plains. And one day, far in the future, the wind began to carry the sound of human voices. At first, no one knew what they were walking on. To the first settlers and explorers who crossed the Great Plains, the strange rocks jutting from the hills looked like nothing more than stone. But sometimes, when the light hit just right, they seemed almost alive. Curved, ribbed, sharp, a shape too precise to be an accident of nature. Something old, waiting to be found. The first fossil hunters were not scientists. They were wanderers, farmers, miners, and adventurers, people who stumbled upon something strange and couldn't look away. They didn't yet have the word dinosaur. That word hadn't been invented, but they felt the awe just the same. Awe that something so enormous, so ancient, could be hiding right beneath their feet. By the late 1800s, that quiet curiosity had turned into something else. A race. The Bone Wars, they called it. Two rival paleontologists, driven by pride and obsession, scoured the American West for fossils. They dug, fought, and competed like the very creatures they were uncovering. And though their methods were messy, their discoveries changed the world. In the middle of all this chaos, something extraordinary happened. A man named Barnum Brown, a fossil hunter working for the American Museum of Natural History, began digging in the Badlands of Montana. It was 1902 when he uncovered something massive, fragments of bone larger than any he'd ever seen. He brushed away the dust, piece by piece, and realized he was standing in the shadow of a giant. He didn't know it yet, but he had found Tyrannosaurus Rex. It took years to uncover the rest. The bones were heavy, delicate, and often broken by the weight of millions of years. But slowly, a shape began to emerge. A massive skull, huge teeth, thick leg bones, a long, powerful tail. And when it was finally assembled, the world gasped. For the first time in human history, we were face to face with a creature that had lived and died before our kind even existed. It was as if the earth had spoken, quietly, patiently, through the stone. The newspapers called it the fiercest animal ever to walk the planet. The name Tyrannosaurus Rex, Tyrant Lizard King, was chosen soon after. And just like that, the king rose again. People lined up to see the skeleton. In museums, under soft yellow lights, the great beast stood once more. Children stared in silence. Adults craned their necks, trying to understand how such a thing could have been real. For many, it was more than curiosity. It was a glimpse into the mystery of time itself. The bones spoke of power, yes, but also of fragility. They told a story of life that had come and gone, and of how thin the line is between existence and extinction. Every tooth, every rib, every fossilized footprint was a message. You are part of something bigger. You come from a world that remembers. Even now, more than a century later, the work continues. Paleontologists return to the same hills where Barnum Brown once stood, armed not with pickaxes and shovels, but with drones, lasers, and scanners. They map the fossils in 3 dimensions, measure their weight and density, and even test microscopic traces of ancient proteins still clinging to the bones. Each discovery adds another sentence to the story, and sometimes they still find something unexpected. A claw beneath the dust, a feather impression, a new species entirely, proof that the Earth never truly runs out of secrets. When you think about it, fossils are more than bones. They're memories made solid. Whispers of the past turned to stone. Each one carries the echo of a heartbeat, the rhythm of footsteps that once shook the ground. They remind us that life is ancient, continuous, and always changing. And maybe that's why people love dinosaurs so much, because they are proof that wonder doesn't die. It only sleeps, waiting to be uncovered again. So the next time you walk through a museum and stand before that towering skeleton, take a quiet breath. Look up at the skull, the teeth, the curve of the spine, and know that you are looking not just at a creature, but at time itself. A life turned to stone, a voice turned to silence, and yet, somehow, still speaking. Because when the bones of the Tyrant King were finally uncovered, they didn't roar. They whispered, and the world listened. Once the bones were assembled, something strange happened. The world didn't just see a pile of fossils, it saw a monster, a mystery, a mirror to its own past. The Tyrant King was reborn, not in flesh and blood, but in imagination. From that moment on, T-Rex stopped being just an ancient animal. It became the dinosaur, the symbol of power, fear, and wonder that would echo through every generation that followed. In the early 1900s, when people first stood beneath the towering skeleton, they felt something new, a mix of fear and fascination. Children clutched their parents' hands. Adults stared up with wide eyes, trying to picture how this creature once moved, hunted, and roared. And though the scientists talked about bones, muscles, and extinction, people heard something deeper, a ghost story written in stone. The first artists tried to bring the king back to life on paper. They painted T-Rex as a lumbering giant, heavy and upright, its tail dragging behind it like an anchor. It was slow, clumsy, and terrifying. A prehistoric dragon made real. For decades, this image defined how we saw the king. In movies, books, and museum murals, T-Rex became the ultimate predator, jaws wide, teeth glinting, eyes wild with hunger. Then came Hollywood, and everything changed. When the first dinosaur movies appeared, the world fell in love all over again. The giant creatures moved on screen. Stop-motion models at first, stiff but alive. Audiences gasped, laughed, and screamed. For the first time, the ancient world seemed to breathe again. But it was in 1993, with Jurassic Park, that the king truly roared back to life. The T-Rex in that movie wasn't just a monster, it was majestic. It wasn't evil, just powerful. When it stepped from the rain, its foot shaking the puddles, its breath steaming in the cold night air, millions of people felt something primal awaken. It was awe. It was fear. It was the memory of something ancient, buried deep in our collective soul. From that point on, T-Rex ruled not only prehistoric history, but pop culture itself. It appeared on lunchboxes, toys, documentaries, and dreams. It became both terrifying and beloved. A paradox we couldn't stop thinking about. How could something so deadly be so fascinating? Maybe because it reminded us of power, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that endures. Yet as our love for the king grew, so did our curiosity. New discoveries began to challenge the old image. Fossils showed that T-Rex might not have been the slow, tail-dragging beast people once imagined. It was fast, agile, and clever. Its eyes faced forward, giving it depth perception. Its sense of smell was extraordinary. It could detect prey from miles away. And perhaps most surprisingly, it might have had feathers when it was young, like a massive, deadly bird. At first, people resisted this new version. A feathered king? Too strange, too soft. But science doesn't follow comfort, it follows truth. And the truth is that evolution is full of surprises. The king wasn't a villain. It wasn't a dragon. It was an animal. Powerful, intelligent, and perfectly adapted to its time. That realization changed how we saw it again. The T-Rex became less of a monster, more of a mystery. A creature that represented not just strength, but the beauty of life itself, how it rises, falls, and changes across the ages. Artists began to paint it differently, no longer just roaring and killing, but standing still, watching, thinking. They gave it color, grace, even quiet dignity. It wasn't just a beast, it was a being, a reminder that even the fiercest creatures are part of the same story as us. Because in a way, we are all the descendants of survival. The same planet that shaped the T-Rex shaped us too. The same storms, the same cycles, the same fragile balance of life and death. That's what makes its story so powerful. It's not just ancient history. It's part of who we are. And so, the legend of the Tyrant King continues to evolve. Each new generation rebuilds it in their own image, from skeletons in museum halls to CGI titans on screen, from children's toys to scientific papers. It lives everywhere, in our art, our dreams, and our endless fascination with what came before. The bones are silent, but the story isn't. It keeps changing, growing, breathing, just like the earth itself. Because the king was never really gone. It only waited for someone to listen. For all the stories, movies, and myths built around the Tyrant King, one thing remains true. We are still learning who it really was. Every fossil, every fragment, every microscopic clue tells a slightly different version of the same story. Science doesn't deal in certainties, it deals in patterns, probabilities, and the quiet voices of bones. In the beginning, paleontology was part excavation, part imagination. Early fossil hunters pieced together what they found like giant puzzles, sometimes guessing what went where. If a bone didn't fit, they made it fit. If something was missing, they filled in the blanks. And that's how myths were born, through the spaces between facts. But over time, technology changed everything. Microscopes, X-rays, CT scanners, DNA studies, and 3D modeling brought the past back with incredible detail. Suddenly, we could see not just the shape of the T-Rex, but how it might have moved, breathed, and even felt. Scientists found evidence that the king's bones were not just massive, but filled with air pockets, light and strong, like those of modern birds. Its muscles were dense and powerful, its tail acting like a counterweight that gave it balance and speed. It wasn't just a lumbering predator, it was a hunter built for precision. And, perhaps most fascinating of all, it may have been warm-blooded, maintaining a high body temperature that allowed it to move and hunt efficiently. Then came another surprise. Inside one fossilized T-Rex bone, researchers found traces of soft tissue, blood vessel-like structures, collagen fibers, and even possible red blood cell remnants. It was as if time itself had left a fingerprint. For a brief, almost unbelievable moment, we were closer to the king than ever before. Not just its bones, but its biology. But science is never simple. Each discovery opens new questions, and each question opens new debates. Was T-Rex truly the unstoppable apex predator everyone imagined? Or was it more of a scavenger, a massive, opportunistic feeder that relied on the work of others? The truth might be somewhere in between. It had powerful jaws, capable of crushing bone with a bite force over 12,000 pounds per square inch, but it also had an incredible sense of smell, suggesting it could track decaying carcasses from miles away. It might have been both hunter and scavenger, a survivor that did whatever it needed to live. After all, the king's goal wasn't glory, it was survival. There were other questions too. Could T-Rex run? For years, artists showed it sprinting after prey, thundering across the plains like a train. But newer studies suggest otherwise. With its massive size, up to 9 tons, its legs likely couldn't sustain high-speed running without breaking under the strain. So instead of chasing, it may have stalked. Slow, silent, inevitable. A living force of nature that didn't need speed, only patience. And then there's the question of sound. Did T-Rex roar like in the movies? Maybe not. The shape of its skull suggests it may have produced low-frequency sounds, deep, resonant vibrations, like a mix between a crocodile's rumble and an elephant's call. You wouldn't hear it as much as feel it, in your bones, in your chest, through the ground. A warning that something immense was near. All these discoveries make the king feel real again, but also strangely human in its mystery. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we still don't know. That's the beauty of science. It's not about answers, but the questions that keep us searching. And maybe that's why people are still so obsessed with T-Rex. It's not just its size or its power, but the sense that it still hides secrets. That beneath every fossil, there's another layer of story waiting to be told. Even now, new fossils continue to surface, sometimes revealing injuries, healed bones, or bite marks from other T-Rexes. Some even suggest that these giants may have fought each other, not for survival, but for dominance. Others show signs of care, old injuries that healed, implying the creature may have lived long after being hurt, perhaps aided by scavenging or even social behavior. Was T-Rex a loner, a family guardian, a territorial beast? No one truly knows. But one thing is clear. The king was more complex than we ever imagined. Not just a killer, but a creature shaped by millions of years of evolution. A being that thrived, adapted, and ultimately fell victim to forces far beyond its control. It reminds us of our own fragility, our own place in the vast story of life. In the shadows of its bones, we see reflections of ourselves. Curiosity, power, survival, and the endless search for meaning. Science may uncover the facts, but the mystery will always remain. And maybe that's exactly how it's meant to be. Because the king's story isn't finished. It's still being written. Not in the dirt this time, but in the stars, in our imagination, and in the soft voice of wonder that asks, quietly, what else don't we know yet? The king did not fall in a single moment. It wasn't one great roar or one final fight. It was silence, slow, creeping silence that spread across the earth. The world was changing. The air grew heavy with dust, the sunlight dimmed, and the forests began to die. What had once been a world of endless green turned gray, quiet and cold. And in that fading world, the great beasts that had ruled for millions of years began to disappear. We call it extinction. But maybe it was more like sleep. A long, deep sleep that came over the planet. One by one, the dinosaurs vanished, not through weakness, but through time itself, reshaping the rules they had once mastered. The story we tell is familiar. A giant asteroid, hurtling toward Earth, striking with unimaginable force. In an instant, the skies burned, oceans rose, and continents shook. But what came after was far worse. Months, maybe years, of cold and darkness. The plants that fed the herbivores died first, then the predators who relied on them. And finally, even the greatest of them all, the Tyrant King, succumbed to the silence. But extinction, in the truest sense, is not an ending. It's transformation. The bones that fell to the ground became part of the soil, the minerals, the very fabric of the earth. Every living thing that came after, Every bird, every mammal, every human walks on the same ground that once held the king's footprints. The past didn't vanish. It became the foundation of everything that followed. Somewhere deep within the genetic story of life, small echoes of that ancient world remain. The birds that fly above us, delicate, bright, and fragile, are distant descendants of creatures that once thundered across the land. Their hollow bones, sharp eyes, and quick movements all whisper a name that time tried to forget. Rex. And maybe that yet's the most beautiful part of the story, that even extinction cannot erase memory. It only changes its form. The T-Rex no longer walks the earth, but its spirit survives in every flutter of wings, in every fossilized footprint, and in the curiosity of those who still study its world. When scientists hold a fossil, they're not just holding stone. They're holding time. Layers of history pressed together until they became something eternal. To touch it is to touch both death and life at once, a paradox so quiet and profound that it humbles even the most logical minds. And in that stillness, there's something deeply human. Because we, too, are dreamers of the past. We build stories from dust, meaning from silence, and beauty from what's been lost. Maybe that's why people sit for hours in museums, staring at a skeleton under dim lights. It's not just fascination, it's recognition. Somewhere in that ancient structure, those ribs, those claws, that skull, we see a reflection of ourselves, small, curious beings trying to make sense of a world that has always been larger than we can imagine. And perhaps the T-Rex, if it could have known, would not have minded its fate. Perhaps it would have understood that all kings fall, not because they are defeated, but because the world moves on, always making room for the next story. The sea gave birth to the land gave birth to the air, and from the ashes of giants came the age of mammals, and eventually, us. But deep down, the world still remembers. Every mountain range, every desert, every river that cuts through stone carries the memory of what came before. At night, when the wind sweeps across the plains, some say it still sounds like distant footsteps. Slow, heavy, ancient. Not ghosts, not monsters, just echoes, dreams of the giants who once ruled the earth. And maybe, in their own way, they never truly left. They live on in our stories, in our art, in the quiet moments when we look up at the stars and imagine what used to be. The king may be gone, but its dream continues, through us. So as the last light fades from that ancient world, and the king lies down one final time beneath the cooling sky, the earth sighs softly and carries on. It turns, it heals, it dreams. And in those dreams, the giants still live. Peaceful, silent, eternal. Millions of years passed after the king's fall. The bones of its world turned to stone, buried deep beneath layers of earth and time. Rain fell, mountains rose, oceans shifted, and the earth forgot its former rulers. But eventually, another creature appeared. One small, clever, and endlessly curious. Humans. At first, people didn't know what they were finding. Strange rocks shaped like bones, teeth the size of knives, footprints hardened into stone. They thought they belonged to dragons or mythical monsters. In a way, they weren't wrong. The stories they told were just early attempts to explain what they couldn't yet understand. Then, in the 19th century, science caught up with imagination. The first fossil hunters began to piece together something extraordinary. Creatures from a world far older than anyone had imagined. They named them dinosaurs, meaning terrible lizards. And among them, one fossil stood out. Massive, powerful, regal. The Tyrannosaurus Rex, the king of the tyrant lizards. When the first skeletons were displayed, people gasped. It was taller than a house, longer than a bus, with teeth like daggers and claws sharp enough to tear through steel. For the first time, humans looked upon the face of a creature that had ruled the world long before them. It was humbling and thrilling, Museums became temples of wonder. Children stood wide-eyed beneath the king's bones, imagining it alive, thundering through prehistoric jungles, hunting, roaring, surviving. Adults stared too, silent and awed, feeling the weight of deep time pressing against their hearts. It was as if the earth itself had whispered a secret. You are not the first. And yet the T-Rex did not stay locked behind glass. It escaped, into books, movies, and dreams. Every retelling made it stronger, faster, smarter. It became not just a fossil, but a symbol of power, mystery, and the fragile connection between life and extinction. When the movies came, first the black and white monsters of the early 20th century, then the breathtaking realism of Jurassic Park, the king returned to life in the minds of millions. The roar that echoed through theaters wasn't just sound design, it was the sound of memory awakening. It reminded us that our world was once wild and untamed, that the ground beneath our feet still holds stories from before time had names. And while filmmakers imagined, scientists kept digging. Each year, new fossils were unearthed, from deserts, cliffs, and badlands across the world. They found not just bones, but pieces of history frozen in time, footprints, nests, and even traces of skin. Each discovery added another brushstroke to the portrait of the king. They learned that T-Rex had feathers as a juvenile, that it grew faster than almost any animal known, and that it could bite through bone with ease. It wasn't just a brute force predator. It was intelligent, adaptable, and highly evolved. Its eyes faced forward, giving it depth perception. Its sense of smell was so strong that it could detect prey from miles away. And its brain, though small, was efficient, tuned for survival in a harsh, competitive world. The more we learned, the more the myth began to change. The king was no longer a monster. It was a masterpiece of evolution. It wasn't just about death and power, but balance and adaptation. Every feature, every tooth, every muscle existed for a reason. It was, in its own way, perfect. That realization changed something in us, too, because studying the king became a way to understand life itself, how it endures, evolves, and responds to change. It reminded us that even the mightiest fall, and that survival doesn't belong to the strongest, but to those who adapt. In classrooms, museums, and documentaries, the T-Rex became a teacher, a reminder that time is both vast and fragile, and that our place in it is just one heartbeat among billions. Children still press their faces to glass, staring at its teeth, its bones, its fossilized eyes. They imagine it breathing again, and for a moment, it almost does. Because every time someone wonders, the king stirs, quietly, patiently, in the human imagination. And maybe that's the real return. Not in science alone, but in curiosity. In the stories we tell, the questions we ask, and the dreams that keep the past alive. The king doesn't need flesh to live again. It lives in our fascination, in our hunger to know where we come from and what came before. In that way, we brought it back. We gave it a second life, one made not of bone and blood, but of thought and wonder. And it will live there, forever. The king sleeps now. Its bones rest beneath museum lights, its name whispered in classrooms, its shadow flickering across movie screens. It has not ruled the earth for 66 million years, yet somehow its presence still fills the world. Not in roars or footprints, but in wonder. There is something timeless about the way humans hold on to the T-Rex. Every fossil, every tooth, every skull is a fragment of a story that never quite ends. It's more than science now. It's mythology reborn. Because deep down, the T-Rex has become our mirror, showing us both the strength and fragility that exist within life itself. When people imagine the prehistoric world, it's almost always the king they see first. Jaws open, eyes blazing, storm clouds behind it. It has become a symbol of power, survival, and dominance. But the real legacy of the Tyrant King is quieter than that. It's not about destruction. It's about endurance. The T-Rex reminds us that everything, no matter how mighty, is a part of a cycle. Empires rise and fall. Species thrive and vanish. Planets change, stars fade, and yet the story goes on. Life keeps adapting, reshaping, reinventing itself, even after extinction, meaning continues, not through flesh, but through memory. That's the strange beauty of the T-Rex. It died millions of years before the first human took a breath, and yet it feels closer to us than some creatures alive today. That's because we made it part of our story, the way ancient civilizations once told tales of dragons and gods. The king became our dragon. But instead of magic, we gave it science. Instead of worship, we gave it curiosity. In a way, we are the storytellers keeping it alive. Every time someone brushes dust from a fossil, sketches its jawline, or whispers its name, the king stirs again. The ground may no longer tremble under its feet, but hearts still do. Quietly, when we remember that we share this same earth, shaped by the same forces that once shaped it. Even now, new generations discover it for the first time. A child stands beneath its towering skeleton, eyes wide, mouth open, caught between fear and fascination. And in that moment, they feel something we all recognize: awe. It's not just about size or power. It's about connection, the realization that the world is vast, that time is deep, and that we are only a small part of something magnificent. And maybe that's what the T-Rex truly teaches us: humility. Because for all our technology and control, we too are temporary. We too are part of an Earth that has seen giants rise and fall before us. The king's bones remind us that dominance is fleeting, but existence, life itself, endures in countless forms. Somewhere, deep in the soil, pieces of the king still rest, waiting to be found, not as monsters, but as memories. And perhaps that's all any creature can hope for: to be remembered, to have its story told long after it's gone. So when you look at the stars or walk through a museum or see a dinosaur toy in a child's hand, remember this: you're looking at more than a prehistoric predator. You're re-looking at the echo of time, the proof that even death cannot erase wonder. The king may have fallen, but its story never will. It's written in stone, in art, in imagination, and in the quiet heartbeat of those who still care to listen. And so, as the lights dim and the world quiets, the Tyrant King sleeps once more, not in fear, but in peace. The earth moves gently above it, oceans whispering where jungles once grew, stars shining where meteors once burned. And beneath it all, the king dreams of the hunt, of the roar, of the endless wild that once was. In the end, perhaps that is the true victory: to be remembered, to be loved, to be endless in story, even when time itself has moved on. The Tyrant King lives forever, not in bones, but in wonder. And as long as someone whispers its name, softly, into the quiet of the night, the earth will remember. And so, the Tyrant King returns to silence once more. We've followed its rise and fall, from the sweltering jungles of prehistory to the cold halls of modern museums. We've seen how its legend was built, how science reshaped it, and how imagination gave it life again. In the end, the T-Rex wasn't just a killer, it was a survivor, a symbol of nature's endless creativity and a reflection of our own curiosity. It reminds us that every creature, no matter how mighty, is part of the same story of time, the same circle of life, change, and rebirth. Perhaps that's why we still dream of it, because deep down, we see a bit of ourselves in its story, our struggle, our power, our desire to endure. And as long as we keep wondering, the king will never truly sleep. Thank you for joining me on this quiet journey through history. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you, 1, to miss the next chapter of the world as hidden past, told slowly and gently to help you drift into peaceful dreams. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and remember, even the greatest kings live on in the whispers of the earth.